All right, Tracy, you want to go ahead?
Okay, good morning. My name's Tracy Evans, and I am the president of the board of Pennsylvania MGMA, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our practice operations seminar. We have a great program planned over the next couple of days, and I'm happy that you're here. A little bit of housekeeping. If you are a member of National MGMA and you need to track your CME credits from today, make sure you log on to the website, the national website, to enter your credits after the session. You should be able to do that. So just a quick reminder for everyone. So we are grateful for the support of our sponsors now and throughout the year. And I would like to thank RX Vantage, who is our first sponsor today. Please welcome Lauren Delfino from RX Vantage, who will say a few words.
Lauren? Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you. Super excited to be here today and happy to be sponsoring the event. So as a quick introduction, RX Vantage is an online platform that allows you to communicate on demand with life science experts, MSLs, reimbursement specialists, and nurse educators. More than 6,000 practices use our platform to improve the quality of information they receive from life sciences, all while automating previously manual processes. We all know that there's more information coming out of life science companies than ever before, which means it's even harder to sift through everything to get the quality of information that your practice needs to provide the best treatment options for your unique patient population. Additionally, as we all know, COVID has put a strain on traditional life science meetings. So many practices are likely experiencing a huge increase in reps calling into their office to try to schedule time or ask about visitation policies. RX Vantage can solve for all of these problems. We put you in the driver's seat so you have control over what information is important to you, how you would like to receive that information, and who you would like to receive it from. A few of our most loved tools include a digital rep directory, on demand of every rep in your area, searchable by product, by drug name, or company. This allows you to find the expert that you need without using business cards, especially if they're outdated. Instant secure messaging is number 2 to all reps initiated by you. This allows you to get the answers that you need instantly and use group messages to communicate policies, virtually eliminating all incoming calls. And lastly, online scheduling, which lets you customize rules and restrictions so reps can only book meetings you want them to, and the platform automates all the logistics, even including virtual meetings. Our most heard feedback after showing practices the tool is, "I can't believe that I didn't know about this sooner." It's incredibly easy to use. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to set up, has no software to download, no integrations, and it's completely free for practices, as it always will be. Learn more at our website, rxvantage.com, or you can shoot myself or Taylor a note and we can get you all set up.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank
you. Now let me introduce our first speaker for today. Becky Mathis-Stump is the Chief Operating Officer of Ethos Leadership Group, LLC. She has a rich background in leadership, strategic analysis and planning, organizational development, governance, and communication. Becky earned a life membership in the Order of the Barristers, a national honor society recognizing excellence in oral advocacy, while completing a doctorate of jurisprudence at West Virginia University College of Law. Please join me in welcoming Becky Mathis-Stump. Becky?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Tracy, and Lauren. Thank you for your sponsorship of the conference. And I always want to give a shout out to Aaron as well, who is behind the scenes making sure that all of this functions like it's supposed to. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I do want to note, for those of you who have the ability to turn on your cameras, I'd love to see you because I'm actually hoping that we're going to have an exceptionally interactive session. And so if you do have that ability, or if you're willing to unmute at points in time in our session, I want this to be something that we're doing together and not something that I'm just speaking at you about this topic, because we've all probably been experiencing remote work, and I think we probably have a lot to share with one another. For those who may not have that capability or just may not feel like that's something you want to do this morning, please feel free to use chat. I will make sure that we are all hearing the insights that you share through that portal as well. So I just want to start with this simple question. How many of you are actually working remotely today? I'm always working remotely. I have a home office as opposed to an office. I see some other folks. I think Taylor raised her hand as well. Those who are chatting, feel free to chat that in. Janet, thanks for turning on your camera. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've got an Annette saying, yep, that's me. I'm working from home today, even inside of this space. Fantastic. And so again, I want you to think about this question. If you were going to take a percentage of your work that you've conducted since COVID began in really March of last year, what percentage of your work have you actually been doing remotely? So just kind of think about that generally. Like, is it 30% of your work has been remote? Is it 50% of your work has been remote? Maybe for some of you, it's been 100%. All right, Taylor says for her, it's been 100%. Angela says for me, 50. Lauren says 100. Someone adds it's about 10% of remote work for me. All right, any others? 95% from Cheryl. All right, so we have a lot of spread there, right, in regard to how much people have been experiencing remote work. Somebody says 5%. Susan, thanks for chatting that in. Kay Allen says none. I've done no remote work at all. Wow, that's crazy. I think you probably might be the exception to the rule that we're typically seeing, but I really appreciate you giving us that perspective. Any others? Approximate percentage, Paul, 5%. All right, fantastic. So I want you to think for just a second reflectively about your experiences. So you've worked remotely, whether it's been 5% of the time, whether it's been 100% of the time. Those who haven't worked remotely at all, this may be a little difficult to answer, but those who've had some experience between 5% to 100% of your time that's been remote, what I'm curious about is what's been the best part of your remote experience? So just think about that a second. Like, I've been working remotely. What's been the best part of my remote experience? What did you like the best? What went the best? What do you think was most effective for you? Just kind of anything along those lines. What was best about that remote experience? And I'll let some people start to chat some things in. All right, Lauren says more time at home with my 6-month-old and less commute. Lauren, that sounds like a benefit all the way around, right? I like that. Shelly says, hey, I've been able to concentrate on tasks at hand with minimal interruptions. Mostly that comes in the form of staff walking in your door. Anybody else resonate with that? Like your interruptions or staff walking in your door types of interruptions? Cheryl says, yeah, for me, it's been less interruptions and more scheduled meetings. Had to do a little more focus. Taylor says, I've been able to focus a lot more. Jennifer says, less driving, right? Jennifer, I really appreciate you adding that perspective along with the commute that Lauren had mentioned earlier. When you start to think about the amount of time that we spend driving and how we can repurpose that time, it kind of is cool to think through. Janet says, I've experienced increased efficiency and less travel. Susan says the same. I've removed my commute and I've been more efficient. And by and large, that's what we hear. And I think it's actually what some survey information that we'll talk about shares the experience. Most remote workers have said something like that. Nicole adds in a really cool benefit. I've been able to be more creative with technology. And I think that is something that we've all sort of had to adapt to, right? We were talking before the session opened about the fact that Zoom got an update and the blur factor went away for some folks. That filter that you could put in the background where it would blur your background, that went away for some people. If you had told me a year and a half ago that I would have been trying to work through the blur factor of Zoom, I would have laughed. Right? But it actually is kind of a cool thing. So we have this ability to be a little more creative. Again, those of you who've worked remotely, answer this question, or maybe you haven't worked remotely, but your team members have. And so you've experienced their remote work indirectly. What's been the worst part of your experience? When you think about what hasn't gone well, what didn't feel good, having to work remotely and or having to lead a team that's working remotely, or having coworkers that you're interdependent on and with. First thing that pops up, Annette, is not being with my staff. That's been a concern. Bethany says it's actually been those tech issues with remote staff. Maybe sometimes things don't work like they're supposed to, and I think we've all experienced that. Taylor says internet going out has been my struggle, right? That's not been fun. If you have to work remotely and you're reliant on Zoom and internet access, it's no good when that goes away. Lauren says, for me, it's been not as much social interaction. And sometimes I feel like I'm less impactful in brainstorming sessions. Yeah, Lauren, that makes a lot of sense, right? Sometimes it's difficult to brainstorm via Zoom. We've actually experienced that as well. People seem a little more hesitant. And then if you're not with your team, it's really hard to brainstorm solo at times. So that makes sense. Paul says, yeah, I've had some tech challenges. Cheryl has sort of missed those spontaneous conversations. Not having access to those has been a concern. Maybe not being in direct communication with other departments, someone mentioned. Technology issues, and doctors seem to be on the call, however, multitasking and distracted. Eileen, preach. I just will stop right there and say, yes, preach. That is our experience as well. Even in settings like this where we're presenting and people want to hear what we have to say, there is such a temptation, right? Such a temptation to be doing other things. So I think we've all experienced that. Erin says she struggled with not having the hard start-stop times of work and home life. And we're going to talk about that a little bit because it's something that experientially we have heard others say. And Annette says, I'm agreeing 100% with Erin. Right. So appreciate that. I really appreciate the feedback on that. And again, for those of you who want to chat, continue to chat. If you're like, Becky, I would really actually just like to unmute and say something. Please feel free to do that. This is designed to be an interactive session. I don't need to be the only person speaking, and you guys have done a great job with chat, but I also don't want to stop people who might feel like they can better express themselves verbally as opposed to trying to chat something in the chat box. So keep that in mind as we move along. I wanted to start there simply because we're all experiencing something together. And it's either we are working remotely or we have members of our team that are working remotely. And we're not the only people who are experiencing it. So I actually want to point to, for just a few minutes, some information that's come out of Gallup's employee engagement surveys. Just for those who may not be familiar with what Gallup does in employee engagement, they basically have created 12 elements of employee engagement that they believe predicts high team performance. Now, they've drawn those conclusions after studying over 100,000 teams with 2.7 million workers worldwide. And so they've really done a depth and breadth of research to come to those places. And ultimately, they kind of classify people in one of three categories. The engaged employees, who are highly involved and enthusiastic about their work and committed not only to their work, but to their workplace. Disengaged employees that have miserable work experiences and then spread their unhappiness to their colleagues. And some of you are smiling, which leads me to believe you have some of those people inside your workforce. And then not engaged employees who are just kind of psychologically unattached to the work and to the company. So for numerous years, I think actually going back almost 20 years at this point, Gallup has been doing these surveys on a fairly regular basis. Sometimes they're just annual, sometimes they're actually done periodically throughout a year because there are certain forces going on in our world that drive them to want to look a little bit deeper. As you can imagine, 2020 was one of those years. And so this is sort of a baseline for what Gallup does. And what they have found in their research across the board is that when you compare like the top quartile to the bottom quartile of engagement, and I apologize, it looks like my slide has a typo there. It should say top quartile to bottom quartile of engagement. You start to see the results that are on the right side of that slide. You get a decrease in absenteeism when there is actually a higher level of engagement. you get an increase in things like overall productivity or sales productivity, increases in profitability. And you could kind of go through, for some of you, your eyes may have been immediately drawn to like that decrease in safety incidents, right? Or that decrease in quality defects as medical care providers and people who are involved in that type of work, seeing those types of numbers, that's kind of attractive, right? We have less safety concerns, we have more quality, less quality defects in the work that we're doing. And by the way, this is conducted across industry type. And so these same results are seen very consistently in industries like yours that are service industries all the way through production industries. So there's a lot of parallel inside of what Gallup has been finding. So they dug a little bit deeper this year. And they said, you know what, we need to look at some comparison points that are pre-COVID versus amid COVID. And they started doing some deep dive into that. And as they did that deep dive, here's some of what they found. Pre-COVID, the percentage of US employees that would be considered engaged was 35%. The percentage that would be truly considered disengaged was 13%. Now, amid COVID, they saw very similar numbers. About 36% of employees were considered engaged, about 13% were considered disengaged. But here's the nuance that the slide doesn't reveal that I think is important for us to think through. There were wild fluctuations in their findings. And so again, they didn't just do an annual survey this year or last year, they actually went in and did more like kind of quarterly and at some points even monthly survey. And here were the types of fluctuations that they saw. In early May, there was literally a record high across all surveying they've ever done of engaged employees. It was at 38%. I want you to think about that. It's May. Think about where we were in May of last year. We had no vaccines yet. We were still amid the middle, just like really the beginning of the crisis, just recognizing how difficult it was going to be. We were just starting to understand the depth and breadth of the impact as far as deaths were concerned and how serious illnesses were, and that effect for after somebody had had COVID, what was still lingering. And despite that fact, and despite the fact that we had actually seen a massive increase, a doubling of people working remotely during that period of time, we actually had higher levels of engagement than we had ever had. Now, I want you to think about like what in the world could be happening that would have created higher levels of engagement with our employers. So for you, what would have made you feel more engaged amid all of that crisis with your employer? Like, let's just think about that for a second. I know what the data says. I'm curious what you think. What do you think could have created that feeling of engagement with our employer, even though most of us were working from home and we had all this other crisis going on? What would have sparked that, do you think? All right, good. I've got a first response. Tracy says, I think it might have been because we were working together to solve problems. Yeah, and Cheryl adds, and you know what? I think part of it is a desire to remain connected. Like when we first left the space, we knew what we were feeling, that absence of people, right? And so remember, we're in May, and so we're feeling that absence. Taylor says, you know, it may have just been that we could all relate to one another, right? And so because we had more feeling of camaraderie, even around this crisis, we felt more engaged with each other and with the organization. I think that's a great observation. Angela says, you know, I think we wanted to be with people in normal. I agree with that as well, Angela. So we were drawn to one another maybe in a way that we hadn't been for a while. Shelley adds, I think we were just trying to figure it all out because we've never encountered it before. And when we're in a state of trying to figure something out, we do feel drawn toward other people who are also trying to figure it out, which is the reason support groups for all kinds of things are so impactful. Janet adds, we're in healthcare And so a pandemic is when it really matters in our world. And so, yeah, there's this moment, right, of engagement where people go, you know what? Now our mission in the world makes more sense than it's ever made before. Not that it doesn't on a normal basis when we're doing our primary care and things like that, but today, amid a pandemic, I feel connected to our mission. And interestingly, everything that you identified is exactly what Gallup found as they were working through those engagement concepts. People needed to be together because they were trying to solve something that hadn't been solved. They were recognizing the value of the work that they do in the global world. And because they had just been removed from their colleagues, they were feeling that absence. There was an absence feeling there. And so all of those factors kind of came into play from Gallup's perspective. But that wasn't the only fluctuation we saw. There was a dip in the engagement level to about 31% a little bit later in late May, immediately after the killing of George Floyd. So think about that. And the potential of upset and unrest and riots. There was an immediate drop in that area. Then, oddly enough, we hit the all-time record high. We had just set a record high. We hit the all-time record high because we surpassed the original record high of 38%. When we got to late June and mid-July, there was actually a 40% engagement level. It's the highest it's ever been in the United States of America, 40%. But then at the end of the year, it dropped back to the 36%. And so Gallup's been trying to figure out, like, what in the world was going on that you see these like crazy fluctuations, because they've never seen them before. They've never seen that extreme of fluctuations. And what they've determined, as best they can tell, is it's all about employer response to the world around us. So employers that were sensitive to what was going on in the pandemic and immediately engaged people and said, if you feel more comfortable working from home, then we will honor that. If employers recognizing the social unrest in our country rather than ignoring it, openly spoke about it, openly shared, openly gave people venues to express the concerns that they had and what was happening in the world around them, those employers were the ones who sparked and spiked that level of engagement. Now, here's the fascinating thing. It didn't necessarily have to be globally to an organization. It actually could have been dramatically impacted by managers. And we'll talk a little bit about the role that managers play in this concept of employee engagement in just a second. But I wanted you to see this and recognize, here's sort of the key findings globally from what they've discovered. From mid-March to early April, remote work in the United States doubled. Not surprising, right? Doubled. We went from about 31% to 62%. We've leveled off now, but approximately 58% of adults in the United States are working remotely at least some of the time still. And there's anticipation that's going to remain true. So we're not going to get past this pandemic and have remote work stop. All indications are that remote work is going to continue. And in fact, the numbers would say we would actually maybe be silly if we didn't honor remote work, because what Gallup has found in this year of trial and tribulation is that employees who work remotely somewhere between 60 to 80% of their time are actually more engaged than those who work exclusively in one place. Now, read that to mean this. Exclusively in one place means exclusively at work or exclusively at home. The key is what is this hybrid effect. The hybrid effect is what is actually making people more engaged. So maybe they're working remotely 60% of the time and in the office 40% of the time, but there has to be a blend of the two concepts. Otherwise, you start to see a significant decrease in engagement level. And here's the critical factors that Gallup ultimately identified. the positions that have seen the best level of engagement, the highest level of productivity, there's two things in common with those positions. Number one, the role has inherently well-defined tasks and processes. So it's not a nebulous concept. I know when I go home, here's what I can do. And two, it doesn't require a high level of interdependent work. In other words, Lauren, it's not brainstorming, right? We're not trying to solve a problem together, as other people have noted. It's literally a task orientation to be able to just focus and get some work done. That's what we're learning. And so what does really all of that mean to us? As leaders, why should we care? Why should we care about what Gallup's finding? Why should we care about our own experiences and the experiences that our employees are having? Here's why it matters to us. Gallup has found in all of their research with this employee engagement tool over the last 20 years that managers affect 70% of the variance in team engagement. I just want you to breathe that in. Those of you who have direct reports, just breathe that in for a second. You, in your role as a leader, as a manager, can account for up to 70% of the variance in whether teams feel engaged, whether employees feel engaged. What's your reaction to that? Are you surprised? Are you not surprised? Are you like, holy smokes, I'm in the wrong position because I don't want to be the person responsible for 70% of the variance? Just curious. Nicole says, I am surprised. All right, what are some other reactions out there? You surprised? Now, are you afraid? Are you scared? Like, whoa, I didn't need to know that, Becky. Not how I needed to start this conference. Any other reactions to that? I'll tell you, when I read the data, I was surprised, right? Like, just on the surface of it, you read the number and you go, whoa, that's a big number. And then I started reflecting on my own experiences as an employee at times past. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's not surprising at all. Because I know I can name for you, I won't, to protect the innocent and the guilty. But I could name for you every supervisor I've had. And I could tell you what they've done that helped me feel engaged and what they've done that helped me feel disengaged. And I could pinpoint that 70% variance in my own experience. We've had a couple of people add in, Paul says, hey, that makes me kind of hold myself accountable, right? Like if I'm potentially responsible for 70% of the variance, that's an accountability thing for me. Somebody else adds, I'm not surprised, but not being on site 100% of the time has made this very challenging. Absolutely. And that's actually where we'll turn our attention next. Taylor says, I'm not surprised because the leader's supposed to set the tone for their team. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that is what we're supposed to do. So for you, here's the cool thing. Gallup and other organizations have done research about the highest performing remote managers. So, and again, this is remote in one of two ways. Either your team is remote, and so you may be managing from the office, but they're remote, or maybe they're in the office and you're managing from a remote location, or maybe that hybrid concept. Here's what has been surfaced as the highest performing remote manager qualities, characteristics, or the things that they do. They're crystal clear about their expectations and priorities. So there's never a doubt what I'm supposed to be doing, whether I'm in the office or out of the office, wherever you're located. You're helping me understand not just the expectations of my role, but the priority of my work. I don't have to say, oh, I did the wrong thing first. Secondly, you're ensuring that the tools that I need to perform my role are at my disposal. And that may be the tools like the computer and the tech and all that other stuff, but it may be the information or the connections to people that I need in order to be able to perform my role well. Third thing is that you're giving me meaningful feedback. I am actually hearing from you regularly about my work production, about its quality, about its timeliness, about anything else that you can give me feedback about. The fourth thing is that remote workers or managers that are actually effective are holding themselves and others accountable. So you're not asking me to do something that you're not asking others to do, and you're not treating me differently, whether I'm in the office or out of the office. And I think that's really important because a lot of times we have a tendency to focus on who and what we can see. And our remote teams, we don't see them, right? They're not in the space we're in. And so it gets really tricky. The other two things that have come up is that the remote managers who've been most effective have made sure their employees have opportunities to continue to learn and grow. And then finally, and this is critical, they've actually helped employees draw proper boundaries between work and life. That's the recipe for success. So what I want us to do now, and we have approximately 15 to 20 minutes to do this, I want us to talk about the strategies that have worked. And this is why I want us to get warmed up to chat and then also to feel free to unmute because I have strategies that we've seen work. I have strategies that our company has employed. We're all remote workers. We've all been remote workers for the last 12 years. And so I know what's worked for us, and I will certainly share those. But what I want to do is invite you to share with one another. You are working this situation just like everybody else on this call. And I know you've done things well. I know there are things that you have tried, strategies that you've employed that have worked. And I want us to use that collective wisdom on this call because I have some cool research and I have some cool strategies that I've seen work, but my voice alone doesn't solve this, right? My voice alone doesn't get us to the finish line that we want. And so please, let's talk together about the strategies that worked. I'll start with just one example. For us, in order to keep that dialogue going, we have intentionally done more check-ins. Now, here's the twist. We've done more check-ins via text and actual phone calls because our team has Zoom fatigue. Anybody else? Our team has Zoom fatigue. We're just tired of being on Zoom calls. And so it came up the very first time, probably 3 or 4 months into the pandemic, when we were about to schedule another meeting and it just became habit to say, oh, we'll do that via Zoom. And one of my business partners said, could we not? And I was like, well, hang on, like, do you mean could we not have the meeting at all? Or do you mean could we not do it by Zoom? And he said, I don't think I can do another Zoom. I already have like 5 of them scheduled over the next 2 days. I don't think I can do another one right now. And we said, oh, get it. Makes perfect sense. So we're actually connecting more, lots more text throughout the day, lots more phone calls. We're just not doing it in the venue that is making people exhausted. It's a little thing, but it's a big thing. Right? Like our calls have been so much better and our texting, our even brainstorm texting has been so much better because we're not having the Zoom fatigue. This seems to resonate with some folks. Angela said 100% been a problem. The Zoom fatigue is real. Lauren says, yep. And Paul says the same thing. I agree that our teams have done that. Tracy, thank you for adding something in. Tracy says, I've implemented a weekly team Zoom with all people interacting. It's just a quick meeting, but it puts all of us on a level playing field that includes both our remote workers and our in-office workers. And then we have some that are both remote and then others that are in the office. That's fantastic. I think it's a great use of Zoom, right? Because what it is the quick. Let's just get on the same page with one another. That's part of that level of engagement that needs to be supported. When Gallup looks at that employee engagement, that's one of the #1 things that they factor in is how often are we actually communicating with one another? And so that's a great concept. Shelley says, hey, we actually do something similar, same type of meeting with our director team just to keep everyone informed. Fantastic. So that's a great use of Zoom. A great use of an opportunity. We actually had a really cool team that did this. I thought it was brilliant. They hadn't been able to pull their team together for a while, so they went to a park and they had a meeting socially distanced in the park. And it was so popular among their team that they're like, we need to do that all the time. And so they've had multiple meetings in the park, right? They could do that. They were able to go to a location that was fun for everybody. You could still be socially distanced, still honor all of those guidelines, and still see each other face to face. And how nice is it to work in a park on a nice day, right? That gets creative juices glowing. And so even that is the kind of thing that's helpful. Eileen said, yeah, Zoom fatigue set in. We're trying to reduce the number of Zoom meetings for a while. I think it makes sense. Annette says, we do connect via Microsoft Teams for quick check-ins, but then I still do my monthly in-person meetings to ensure that I have face-to-face. Annette, bless you. Those in-person check-ins that people have avoided, those are so important and impactful to individuals. Thank you for doing that. Another thing that we've done, and again, let's just keep the ideas, what has worked in keeping people moving, keeping people engaged. One of the things that we've done in our world is we have asked our team to stop scheduling meetings every day. So we are trying to the best of our ability to have 2 days a week that we don't do meetings at all. Now, that may be a little easier for us than it is for you all. We're consultants, and so we can kind of control our schedule a little differently maybe than what you're capable of, but we're trying to honor 2 days a week that we don't do any meetings in order for people to be able to do the deep work that they need in focused task orientation, right? Like writing articles and moving projects and working on strategic planning. Those are the kinds of things that we have to do, and that's what we're doing in those 2 days. Now, part of the reason is because we want to give that focused time, but part of the reason is simply this, and just tell me if this is your experience as well. I pack more meetings into my days now than I ever did working in an office. Anybody else? Like literally, today is one of my days that I am supposed to have meetings, and I go from 1:30 to 2 to 3 to 4 with no break today in the afternoon. We didn't used to live that world. We used to be able to get up out of our offices and go walk to the water cooler, the proverbial water cooler, and have a conversation. And as much as that sometimes was a disruption, if somebody popped their head into our offices, at least we stopped for a second and communicated with other people. We got up and walked around and we went to the break room. We don't do that anymore. And so what we found in our work since last March is that our calendars were overscheduled. So our basic approach, and it was an intentional discussion, rather than saying, look, we're going to put our breaks in the day where you can't schedule a meeting or we shouldn't be scheduling a meeting, we went to the 2 days that we don't have any meetings at all. So we're like, fine, if you want to run hard for 3 days and schedule back-to-back meetings, that's fine. That's cool. That's up to you as a calendar scheduler. But we want you to honor 2 days a week that you're not doing it. And so thinking about that a little bit, like how do we kind of remind people that we're not built to go 8 hours solid without a break? And what kind of guidelines can we put around that for people? When I say we did this as a team, it's kind of a rule. And we have the ability to hold each other accountable. We can see each other's calendars. And if we see that somebody seems to be moving toward a direction of scheduling too much, we'll have a phone call. Hey, I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned about what I'm seeing on your calendar, right? We're holding each other accountable because what we ultimately recognize is that our well-being is at stake. And not just our well-being, but for us, our clients' well-being. Right? If we're not well, we're not going to serve them well. And so that's become like a big deal. And apparently this is an experience that you guys have had. Angela says, yeah, I'm back to back all day. Shelly says, and because I don't need to drive to any of them, I can just keep them moving, right? We don't have that natural break anymore. And so that's just something to consider. But again, what else have you guys done? What have you done to help your employees stay engaged, but honor that well-being line? because that line is really impactful. The employees who feel most engaged feel like their well-being is also honored. So we're at this place where we have to balance, right? We want to get engagement for the sake of productivity, but we won't get engagement if people don't feel like their well-being is actually intact. So what else have you all done to maybe draw some of those boundaries out for that team to be able to help them stay engaged because they're well? And then consequently, they can be productive. Anything else you've experienced or tried? And again, feel free to unmute if it's easier for you to share your story that way as opposed to chatting. All right, I'll give you another example, just something to consider. In our work and in the work of a couple of our clients, we've seen the really effective use of tools like Planner and To-Do and things like that, where you're organizing projects. We've gotten a lot better, and we've seen teams get a lot better at actually prioritizing those in a healthy way, and then making sure that there's clarity around who is doing exactly what by exactly when. And so I actually think that's part of the benefit of having some tools, maybe forcing us to think a little differently when we're working remotely, because how many of us have been to a meeting and we've decided there's a set of actions we need to pursue, but we don't quite get to the point of assigning them? Anybody ever been in that meeting? Oh, we need to do this. But nobody goes, oh, and Becky, you're the one doing this, and Nicole, you're the one doing this, and Janet, you're the one doing this, and Taylor, you're the one doing this, and here's when it has to be done by. And oh, by the way, if one of these other kinds of things comes up, it's more important, right? Like sometimes we just miss that. And so we've actually been using technology tools to help us do that. And we can prioritize things better. We're seeking this type of clarity, this type of pinpoint clarity. Becky will draft a PowerPoint by such and such date. David will review and edit the PowerPoint by such and such date. Like it seems really, really simple to the detail of what we're trying to do, but it has been enormously helpful as we've been working remotely, right? And as we've had the pressures of schedule. And so those simple kinds of tools that we can really deep dive on, so everybody knows what they're accountable for, everybody knows when they're accountable for it, and everybody knows when a project is complete because everybody's checked the boxes. We've all got this part done and it's been passed on to the next person, to the next person, to the next person, and now we wrap up. There are moments of celebration that have been able to occur. And that's one of those places where we've used texts and phone calls. Hey, dude, great job. Appreciate you getting that wrapped up today. That project is done. We can close that out for that client, right? It's just created these moments where we can honor what we've done. How many of you have felt as if you've just trudged through the work and there hasn't been a celebration of what you've accomplished recently? Anybody else? Anybody else missing celebration in your work? I'm seeing some people nodding their heads. Yeah, you're missing celebration. And in my opinion, that's one of the major challenges of remote work. We're not celebrating when we're done with something because we're not in the space that we would typically do that. And so for us, we've been very mindful. When we close out a project, we have a rah-rah moment, very intentionally, a rah-rah moment, whether it's text or phone call, whatever it is, we're having those moments because people are motivated, employees are engaged by those moments of celebration. And so intentionally fitting some of those in becomes a big deal. Several people have said, yep, that's been our experience. And Angela says she even gets really detailed. My staff missed their celebration treats, right? Angela, I don't know if this is something that you can do or something that you would consider, but we have a really, really cool client, CEO of a local United Way agency who I absolutely adore. She sent celebration treats to her remote workers' home address periodically when they would do something cool, right? Like she has their home address because she's got their payroll information in their system, and she just sent them stuff, little things, like little tiny things, sometimes just a card, sometimes they were actually like a cookie or something like that they had made and wrapped and the whole bit. Lovely, lovely idea. And we know the impact that had because her team has been phenomenal in this pandemic. They've had to be responsive to the community, and those little gestures are the things they talk about that gave them energy. And so how do we do this? How do we keep people engaged? How do we honor their well-being? We celebrate, folks. We celebrate because people need to feel that uplifting moment. And it's so easy for that to be the thing that falls off our radar, right? So easy for that to be the thing that falls off. I'll give you one other example. And then again, I'd love to hear anything else you have to say as we kind of wrap up this session. The other thing that we've seen people do, now we haven't implemented this ourselves, but we've seen other people do it and it's working, is allowing people to have flexibility in their working hours. So yes, they're working remotely, but they don't necessarily have to keep an 8 to 5 schedule. If they would prefer to keep a schedule where they're up at 5 and they're working at 6 and they're done at 3 so they can help the kids with homework, because everybody had to do that. That's parents, right? You guys that are parents not only became parents, but you became teachers. So people started flexing that work. Now, here's the caveat that I think is important, and it's just keep eyes on this as a manager. There are critical moments of handoff that still need to be honored. So if I'm working on a project, there has to be some ability to communicate with somebody that has a time deadline, that I'm still honoring that time deadline, right? Like those handoff moments. So keep that eyes on that if you're thinking about allowing people to use flexible working hours. Those handoff moments are critical. If payroll is due at 3 o'clock, and somebody is working a shift where they're working 12 to 8 because that's how they prefer to work, that 3 o'clock handoff still needs to occur. And so being able to pinpoint what are those critical handoff moments that everybody honors, no matter how flexible their working hours are, I think that becomes a big deal. But what we've seen and what we've heard experientially is that people that have flexible working hours feel better about the company. In other words, they're more engaged. They feel better about their work because they're doing it in the time that makes sense for their brains and their schedules and their real life, and they're getting better work done. And so that may be something to consider. Aaron says, our supervisor has remote ordered Dunkin' Donuts for our team to pick up for virtual coffee breaks. So we pick up our coffees and log in for a coffee chat. Aaron, that is brilliant. I love that. Kudos to your supervisor for thinking of that. It honors that need to celebrate. It also honors that need to just be with the team, right? Because at the end of the day, what's really happening here is our work world is changing. I do not believe, nor does the research indicate, that we are ever going to work exactly the way we did before COVID. People talk about normal and they talk about the new normal. There's going to be a new normal. And in fact, if we're going to capitalize on what we've learned during this pandemic, there better be a new normal. If 60 to 80% of work needs to be remote for people to feel the most engagement, but it can't be exclusively remote, we've got to get back to that balance of having some moments where people are in our spaces in the office and other moments where they are able to work from home. Keeping in mind, you as a manager, as a leader, you're the key. If you're creating clear expectations, if you're creating proper communication venues, if you're giving celebration moments, if you're doing those things, your people will respond. And not only will they be productive, but they will be well. And people who are well are people who are engaged, who are people who are productive. You see how it becomes cyclical. That's what we're looking for. Taylor adds, balance is so important. We need to make sure we get outside and take a walk or work out, make sure we find time to eat, to fuel our brain. We need to be able to produce, but we need to take care of our mental and physical health. And Taylor, that is a fantastic summary of this concept. We have some advantages to be able to do some of those things differently in a remote or hybrid working environment. And I really think that's how we have to think of it. We have to think of it as a hybrid working environment. We have some of those abilities. At the very same time, there are temptations to ignore every bit of that as we blur the line between work and rest, right? Because of being working from home a lot of time. And that balance is what's critical. I could not have said that better, Taylor. You wrapped us up exceptionally well. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind your role. Find that balance, strike that balance, recognize that people who feel well, feel engaged, and people who feel engaged get productivity. That's what we're looking for. That's that secret sauce. And you are a natural person to create the context where that can happen. You're responsible for 70% of it. So go do it the right way. We have some great ideas that have been shared in chat today. Hopefully a few things that I shared were helpful as well. Go do it the right way and you will get that balance that we're looking for.
Thank you so much, Becky. That was a great presentation. I think we all have a lot of things that we can take from that and start to implement with our teams. And also a thank you to Lauren and RX Vantage for their sponsorship of the program. Just another reminder to log into MGMA to log your credits, and don't forget to click the next link for the follow-up program that starts in a few minutes. So we will see everyone then. Thank you very much.